Welcome to a new episode in our series of thought leadership conversations hosted by Novus North. I'm Dave Cowling, CEO of Novus North, and today we'll be speaking with David Bresnahan. David's co-founder and managing partner of Chartis, a marketing and technology consulting agency that focuses on value creation for their clients. David, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, Dave, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
I appreciate your time. Maybe before we get started, you could spend a minute just introducing yourself.
Yeah, I'd love to. As you mentioned, co-founder of Chartis. I've been in the marketing technology space for more years than I probably want to say on the call today. But I come from large agency background, and my business partner and I started Chartis back in 2019, so right before COVID, which was a great time to start a business. But we really focus across a multitude of industries, and financial services is a big focus of ours. So really what we're trying to do from an upper funnel performance marketing perspective to experiential perspective and an ongoing retention perspective is how do we drive the most value for our clients? And one of the things we're going to be talking about today specifically is around how is AI really focusing and really coming to light given all the changes that are happening so rapidly. So it's something our business is inevitably trying to solve for, and we're trying to be on the cusp of it, even though things change every minute of every day. So looking forward to chatting through that a little bit.
No, that's fantastic. And why don't we just get right into it? I think we've been seeing a lot of, like everybody, we've been seeing a lot of people talk about AI, talk about deploying it in their organization. But I think one area that's really critical, kind of around awareness and acquisition, is kind of a sea change that's occurring from our old world of search and our old ways of doing search engine optimization. So I'd love to just dive in and maybe we can kind of start with what is that landscape? What are kind of the issues that companies are seeing with this shift in AI?
Yeah, from our perspective, and we kind of have to make a perspective and a choice in terms of where we're actually going and kind of bringing content out there. One of the main things that we've been talking to our clients about, regardless if it's a retail bank or if it's more on the institutional side, is really to focus on brand and visibility. At this point, the way that SEO used to work, ranks are out the window. We don't really care about ranks. We're not really building segments and keyword lists anymore because at the end of the day, people are searching in different areas and they're searching in different ways. So SEO isn't necessarily dead, but it's definitely evolving in terms of how we're focused on our clients to build out strategy. So we really focus on four kind of key tenets. One, technical optimization. So there's still foundational things from an SEO perspective that you really have to hit on. So heavy reliance on JavaScript, for instance. The generative AI and LLMs don't like that, so it won't necessarily pick up your content. On the content strategy and UX front, very important. So how are you actually writing content that's more semantic, right? Snippets, FAQs, write it in a way that these engines will pick it up. And then probably one of the biggest things where I don't see tons of people investing right now is more on the brand signals. So what is the reputation for some of these brands, right? All of these different engines are heavily in citation, and the different engines go to different places to find answers. So things like ChatGPT, heavy Wikipedia focused. If you go to the perplexities, very heavily community, right, on the Reddit side of things. So dependent upon where you want to play in visibility based on how people are searching, you really need that reputation side to be very, very strong. So again, there's no keyword stuffing. There's no ability to just create and churn out content that's going to have you be able to show more visibility there. So it's really how do you do all four of those things really, really well, as well as continue on the foundational aspects of your digital experiences.
I'm curious, Dave, how are you seeing users, consumers, business to business customers, how are you seeing their behavior changing in the search space?
Yeah, so if we look at a macro perspective, you can see that the 60 to 80%, depending upon what you're reading on any given day, are zero clicks. So people are finding most of their answers without ever getting to a brand's website. So that's huge. And then if you look at just AI overviews, for instance, on financial services specifically across the industry, so this is retail again, all financial services, that makes up about 10% of AIO search volume in terms of returns. And then if you even break it down even more, of people who look at ChatGPT, for instance, about 77% of the US population uses it, 20% of that is actually doing it for financial services information. And then you look at institutional buyers, about 77% of those individuals are actually using AI for their research. So we're drastically seeing an increase in these tools being used on everyday life. And Google search share dropped to about 90%, I think, back in late 2024 for the first time. So Google's not going anywhere. It's just the means of how people are going to different areas to find information. So again,
Right.
if the brands that we work with, and then if other brands, financial services brands, if they're not focused on how you can maintain that visibility, you will be lost. You'll become invisible in these engines. So it's very important that as customers continue to think through how do we build our strategy to really build in the fact that these things need to be noticeable in these engines moving forward.
Yeah, and it's really this sort of behavioral, I think we think about this thing as kind of a technology change, but I think the really interesting thing is it's changing behavior.
Mhm.
The way we interact with kind of that first platform. It used to be Google. Now it's whether it's Gemini or Chat GPT or something else. We're spending more time there, and we may never even know. As a marketer, we may never even know. What a user has learned, which I find fascinating.
Mhm.
Which sort of ties then sort of back to me. There's a little bit of how do you measure success in this space as somebody trying to promote your brand and engage with your audience when they're spending so much more time in this other venue in ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude, what have you.
It's a great question, and again, it's changing all the time. As the traditional metrics, like click throughs, as we've seen year over year, have decreased drastically. Impressions are more and more important. I think Google, last time I checked with AIO reviews, about 49 to 50% increase in impressions on Google. So that's a great determination. Also referral traffic. Again, it's smaller percentages that these engines are actually taking over the full volume of traffic. But as you start to see these referral channels come into your site, that's a critical piece. But we keep it a little bit simple. So either tracking citations, making sure you're getting your external brand signals out there and you're working for different industry best practices, and not only focusing on your website, but other external channels is key. The impressions are critical as well. So our impressions going up, maybe your traffic's going down, but you're still getting conversions. And I think the other thing is focusing on how you're creating kind of middle and bottom funnel content. So that more intent-based transactional content. And are you getting better engagement on that as you start to push that out? So good, for instance, if you start to see great referral traffic coming from these engines, specifically those pages, that means you're doing something pretty well from an engagement side, if you're able to track that attribution.
Yeah, terrific, terrific. That sort of then transitions into maybe the where, right? So where I know we're still early days. This is kind of moving pretty fast. Where are financial services organizations seeing early return, and where do they expect to see return on their AI search efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not only AI search, but also internal. So from an
Yep.
efficiency and productivity perspective, I think UBS has shifted about 60% of their AI to internal efficiency. So I think that's critical. Now, while Chartis, we do focus on building internal agents and solutions, it's only a percentage of the services that we offer. So I think from a financial services perspective, a lot of the larger banks and institutional and investment firms are really hedging that. I think if you look at the banking side of things from a search perspective, continuing to invest in the content strategy in a way that it actually is more relevant to some of those intent-based signals is going to be key. So as long as people aren't, again, don't like the term boiling the ocean, but really focus on very kind of micro things as a part of their business, I think they can win out as opposed to trying to solve this monolith AI challenge that we're having. So I think there's a few ways to do it, but at the end of the day, as long as you're being thoughtful in terms of how you're doing your existing strategy to meet the needs of some of those generative engines, that's the best thing that we've been working on with our clients.
Got it. Well, and you've kind of been alluding to this and maybe sort of peppering it in, but at Chartis and kind of your capabilities, sort of how do you help brands kind of make the move into the space and gain some advantage in this space?
Yeah, so if there's been marketing technologies that have come out for the last 10, 15 plus years. So we try to boil down AI to any other piece of technology. So at the end of the day, it's an enabler of something. So CDPs, DMP solutions were the biggest thing 5, 6 years ago. CDP is very important from a first party perspective and knowing your customer. But we look at it as just another tool, right? I read another article, I think 80 to 90% of all AI initiatives fail. And I think I don't know all the reasons why they fail, but it's probably because there wasn't a business case to actually use the AI for. So what we like to do at Chartis is really focus on the opportunity mapping or finding what the business case is. So depending upon the business case, then we would determine what the best solution is. Build versus buy. Is it start something very small and pilot it? Is it really to hyper focus on maybe one portion of your customer journey or one audience type? Or if we do some analysis and find there's really a gap in all your competitors talking about one thing, maybe it's outsourced trading. How do we really win in that space and build authority there? So I think there's a few different ways you can do it, and that's how we are helping our clients, but it's really honing in on something very small, learning, putting some metrics associated with it, and seeing if we're moving the needle. Because again, as you mentioned, what are the different metrics in terms of seeing success here? It's always changing. So we just want to get things out there, not necessarily hamper ourselves with thinking about this and strategizing this thing too much, and really pushing content, pushing optimizations from a technical perspective, really pushing and helping on the citation and reputation front. How can we get more content out there outside of our digital experiences to third party and second parties? So pilot approach is what we have done since the beginning before this whole AI boom happened. And it's just worked really well, especially for large enterprise brands, given our size. They don't want to sign up from some massive project that has no ROI. So it's much easier for us to really hone in on a need, and then we figure out, okay, what's the best way for AI to help that particular need.
Fantastic. As we sort of bring this to a close, David, if you were to kind of really give organizations sort of one bit of advice, one place to sort of make their next move, what would that be?
That's a broad question. So I think it's a few things. One, nobody really knows what's going on, even though we claim to be the experts. Everything is constantly changing. So I think the first thing is not to be too scared about this whole AI realm. I think it's an opportunity, if anything, at the end of the day. I think the other thing too is you don't necessarily have to change operationally how you do things. I think you have to take advantage of how these different types of engines are working and how users are actually finding information, and then tweaking your existing processes, governance, et cetera, and your models just to take that into consideration. A good, for instance, is if you look at some of the large institutional spaces, or if you look at a lot of prospectus and thought leadership or perspectives that people have in the financial services industry, it's tons of content. It's laden with all sorts of perspectives, et cetera. You're already creating that for either your investors or putting that out as thought leadership.
Yeah.
If you're creating that content, going through the legal process and reviews, how do we start to build information out of that into snippets and FAQs? And how do we do the research on what our consumers and users are actually looking for? Continue writing the content, but create derivative content for your customer journey. So it's a great case of not necessarily having to change what you're doing, but keeping in mind how these agents work. So you're creating that content to be leveraged in those situations. I think the other thing too is on the technical front of things, if you're deploying new sites, if you're optimizing or you're rebuilding or replatforming or migrating, or if you're like a lot of the large financial institutions are buying smaller businesses all the time, they're migrating those in. Being thoughtful in terms of the authority those smaller brands have and bringing those into the larger experience is critical, right? So if you're already going to be migrating the site into your experience, think about how do we migrate that from the perspective of agents understanding the authority of that. So again, I don't necessarily think you have to go and do AI over here in its own kind of swim. Right. It's how do you sort of build it into your existing processes to be more efficient with your time and get more synergy at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I like the sort of the practicality of weaving it into existing initiatives. I think the one other thing that I would add is if you haven't gotten started, get started, pick something, doesn't have to be huge, and start, really start learning. Because I think that's the big thing that organizations need to start is gaining some traction with it, gaining some comfort with it, and moving forward.
Yeah, a couple of things on the learning side, and I have clients push back on me. We do a lot of CRO and experimentation tests. I always say there's no such thing as a failed test because you learn from it, and usually push back, and I say, well, there's a couple of reasons why this failed, but at least we learned something. So I think that's critical. I think the other last thing that I'll mention, you can't be everything to everyone, right? Especially in the AI world, there's so much different types of intent, so much different portions of the consumer and customer journey that you can't win in all places. So I think asking yourself the question, where is it most important for my business to win? So if it's some of the middle bottom funnel areas that are really just more niche and there's really no one playing in that space, I think that's a great area to play. So if someone searches for what's investment management, if you're a large bank, you don't care to win there. Like Investopedia, those types of things, or Wikipedia is going to pop up. But if you're asking for, I have an IRA and I'm looking for a very specific need and I'm in the Atlanta area, that's when you might want to be able to have content that's going to meet that specific need. Or if I'm a retail bank and I don't have a really good local strategy and people are searching for, I'm single, I'm buying my first house, what's the best mortgage? And I want to compare them in the Florida area. So those are the types of things, if you do the research up front and there's gaps there, or if you're not even showing up to begin with, you might have to rethink, okay, how do we start to build that into our strategy to start showing a little bit of relevance? Because again, at the end of the day, what we started with, you're invisible. There's no other way to get out in front of these engines unless you're thinking about the way that people are searching and asking questions, making sure that you're the answer.
Terrific. An awful lot that we covered in a very short period of time. David, I want to thank you for taking the time with us today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I talk about this every minute of every day, so glad we got it on your channel. It's great.
Thank you.